You ready? Okay. AG, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. This is a short-ish statement that I'm going to read, and I'll probably take one or two questions at the end of the statement. As the public will be aware, the government has, over a significant period of time, been making significant efforts to introduce the use of photo identification cards for the purpose of voting and for updating the register of electors, which is popularly referred to as the voters list. Updating the list requires removal of all names of persons who are dead, have been overseas for more than 5 years, are disqualified from voting, or are otherwise not entitled to be on the list. The public will also be aware that the government has not received the cooperation and support of the opposition parties in its efforts to bring about these reforms. Instead, the government has at every turn been impeded, obstructed, and has even met with violence and the threat of increased violence in its efforts to get Parliament to pass the necessary amendments to the electoral laws so that the two main reforms, namely mandatory use of photo identification cards for the purpose of voting and updating of the register of electors, the voters list, can be implemented. As reported some months ago, in light of this continued obstruction, and in the hope that Dominica's electoral reform effort could benefit from their collective expertise and technical support, the government invited the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, the Commonwealth, COMSEC, and the Organization of American States, OAS, to send a joint mission of electoral experts to Dominica to meet and discuss the issues with the government, the main political parties, and other stakeholders. The joint special mission was in Dominica from the 6th to the 9th of August 2019, and over 2 days, that is the 7th and the 8th of August, met and discussed the electoral reform issues with the various stakeholders. The joint mission has now submitted its report, entitled Report on the Joint CARICOM Commonwealth OAS Special Mission to Dominica. The report sets out the joint mission's observations, conclusions, and recommendations. Before commenting on the report, I wish, on behalf of the government, to publicly express sincere thanks to CARICOM, the Commonwealth, the OAS, and members of the joint mission for their efforts to assist and support Dominica in our electoral reform effort. We are appreciative. I would like also to record that copies of the report will be forwarded to His Excellency the President, the Electoral Commission, leaders of the political parties, and various stakeholders with whom the joint mission met whilst in Dominica. The report will also be made available to the wider public on the government website, which can be found at www.dominica.gov.dm. Turning now to the report. Having considered the report, the government is pleased to note that the Joint Special Mission, like the government, is of the view that the existing electoral legislation must be amended to enable the introduction of photo identification cards. The government is also pleased to note that the mission has acknowledged that the Prime Minister has the constitutional right to call elections at any time of his choosing. As regards other recommendations and aspects of the report, however, the government notes and accepts the important best practice principles that 1. Electoral reform needs to be carefully managed to ensure that it fulfills its intended and stated purpose without confusing electors and with minimal disruption to the electoral administration. And 2, an an unsuccessful attempt at reform could have serious consequences. In that vein, regrettably, the government is unable to accept aspects of the recommendations contained in the report. In particular, in relation to the recommended house-to-house re-verification exercise. The government's reasons are detailed fully in its written response to the joint mission. In summary, the government is of the view that the recommendations, in particular in relation to re-verification, are unworkable and, if implemented, will cause confusion and disruption, contrary to best practice, and, importantly, will not result in the required updating of the register, otherwise known as cleansing of the list. Specifically, the proposed re-verification will not result in the mandatory use of photo identification cards for the purpose of voting, i.e. every voter being issued with and required to use a photo identification card to vote, nor will the register of electors, otherwise known as the voters list, be properly updated or cleansed. That is, the removal from the list of the names of all persons not entitled to be on the list because they are either dead, have been overseas for more than 5 years, or the other provisions under Section 7 of the Registration of Electors Act, which is found at Chapter 203 of the Laws of Dominica. Additionally, the recommendation that a house-to-house re-verification exercise should be conducted across the country is not supported by Dominica's laws, and even if it was, it could not properly update or cleanse the voters list as proposed because it proposes that persons whose names are on the list but were not met with during the re-verification exercise would still be allowed to remain on the list and to vote. Dominica would therefore essentially be in exactly the same place in respect to the voters list as we now are. Accordingly, the report will have the unacceptable impact of causing the state to incur significant increased financial, human, and other resource costs for no real reform or discernible improvement in our electoral process. What should be clear to all is that, contrary to what is said by some, electoral reform is a complex and in many aspects challenging endeavor, which requires the cooperation, political maturity, broad involvement, and goodwill of as wide as possible a cross-section of the society. With that in mind, the government will continue to be mindful of the very important best practice principle that an unsuccessful attempt at reform could have serious consequences. The government is of the firm view that in all the circumstances, the draft amendment bills and the confirmation process proposed in those bills provides the best means of securing credible, workable, and lawful electoral reform, which will deliver mandatory issuance and use of photo identification cards for voting and the updating, otherwise known as cleansing of the voters list. In conclusion, the government will continue to seek to engage the opposition parties, other stakeholders, the joint mission, and other regional and international partners in its efforts to successfully implement the needed electoral reforms. Thank you. I'll take a couple of questions if there are any. But then,
what you want to take anything? Any question?
relevant to the issue of.
Just for now. Okay,
yes.
okay, just for now. But I was just checking there. I didn't call you on the 20th.
No.
I did call you on the 20th of September. 20th of September,
Okay,
2019. Check your phone.
I'll check that. I'll check
your
that.
phone. I just wanted to make sure.
Sure.
It's right there.
Okay.
And I'll give you the time too. You are saying.
Just whilst you're on that, because tips to the road. A good idea is you call me on my cell, but if you don't get me on the cell and you really, really want to get me, probably call the office. 266 4278 or 266 3092. I have a tendency, if I don't recognize the number and depend on the circumstance, I may not necessarily answer.
I thought you had my number.
And it will get lost. No, I don't have it.
Anyway, so well, you're saying that, Mr. AG, that the joint mission submitted its report. Yes, however, the report it submitted is one unworkable and will cause confusion, etc. And you also said that it's costly for no real reform. It's very costly. So then, what's the way forward? And how quickly are you seeing that matter to be resolved?
Well, okay, there's a couple of questions, it seems to me, in that. One is, let's take the first thing. I think you, with your knowledge of the whole electoral reform discussion and issues, my understanding is, and I think you might agree, that whilst there are various other reforms that people feel are needed, in terms of the immediacy for the next election, I think there are two reforms that all parties, as far as I'm aware, accept are required and would assist. One is the introduction of identification cards, and the other is for the list to be cleansed, as some people call it, or updated, however you put it, but that you have a list or the register of electors which comprises only those people who are lawfully supposed to be on it. Those are the two fundamental issues, and really it's those two issues that one was hoping that the Joint Commission would be able to assist with. Now, to answer your question more specifically, in respect to the issue of the list, what the Joint Mission is proposing is something that they describe as house-to-house re-verification.
Like Guyana.
Like Guyana. But if you look at Guyana's legislation, you will see that Guyana actually has an express provision which states that they have to conduct house-to-house re-verification. Dominica does not have that. Or Dominica has its registration in a different manner. So in other words, you would present yourself as the onus really is on the individual to go and get yourself registered. Our law does provide a provision in Section 8, for example, of the Registration of Electors Act that empowers the Chief Elections Officer or Chief Registering Officer, using that hat, to go to a home and to require the occupant of the dwelling home to provide information. But that's in relation to first-time registrants and not people who are actually on the list and who you're seeking to confirm or verify. But B, it also limits the information that can be asked for. It's really the occupant is required to give from his or her knowledge the names of all persons living in that abode who are qualified to be registered. So it's a limitation. It's not broad enough for what we want. Which is interesting. One of the things that the draft bills that the government and the in consultation with the Electoral Commission are proposing would address that, would actually increase the authority and the power of the Electoral Commission. They'll be able to ask more, basically conduct investigations, ask any question they want almost to clarify that. So that's the issue, the legality question, whether it may be that the Joint Mission, because they go to various places, and I believe they may have had some involvement in Guyana, but it may be that the Joint Mission assumed that we had the same legislation in drafting the recommendation.
You said that recommendation, the house-to-house re-verification, it's not workable at this time. Are they proposing for this election or future elections?
Well, they don't expressly anywhere in their report say for this election, but the inference and the understanding was that they knew, we knew, everybody. It was on the basis, and part of the invitation was on the fact that we have a limited period of time between now and the latest date upon which the election can be called, or by which the election must be called. So I am interpreting it, and I think correctly, that the proposals that they are putting forward are proposals that are proposing for the coming election.
And the main reason why you say it will not be accepted is not because it's too late, but because our laws don't really require that sort of position.
Well, no, not that one. That is for the re-verification. Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Our laws don't really.
There are two things. one is that the laws do not provide for it.
Right.
But secondly, even if the laws provided for it, it's almost a futile exercise because, and in the probably I'd have to think, but in the report, which will come out subsequently because obviously we responded, but in the report, it says, it recommends the re-verification, but it goes on to say, or to recommend, that if somebody is on the list and they're not picked up, for want of a better term, in the re-verification, that they must still remain on the list. So
that is the same thing as Guyana. That's for what I understand. Guyana is also.
Well, if it is the same. It's what we have now. So what we want is to remove people. So if you do a re-verification exercise and you say, even if I don't meet you, or even if you hide from me, or whatever, you will still stay on the list and still be able to vote. What's the point? So it is that's part of why we're saying it's not working, because whereas the confirmation process that is being proposed in the draft bill is that the individual who is on the list and wants to be confirmed must present themselves and satisfy the electoral office staff, the chief elections officer, that they are entitled to remain on the list. And if they fail to do that, either because they don't present themselves or in a count, there will be the relevant publication and so on, and they'll be given the opportunity to what is referred to now as due process. But after due process, they will be removed. So this process, to be effective and for us to get the cleansed of the list, we need a process which is very clear, simple, and can be executed, with simplicity. So, for example, you say house to house. We go house to house. If you are found, fine, and if you're not found, there's a time window within which you have to present yourself and other process of due process. And if you fail to do that, you'll be removed from the list. Otherwise, you have a list which is, questionable still.
So the government says this one is not workable. Which other recommendations are you all as a government accepting? Which ones you are not accepting?
Well, they've only made, in terms of the recommendation, bear in mind, they focused on the identification cards. Mm-hmm. They focused on the re-verification, which is, and they focused on diaspora. Well, in respect to diaspora, they're saying pretty much the same thing, which is also why the government doesn't accept that recommendation either, because what they're saying is the same thing. For the diaspora, if they don't verify, once they're on the list, they can remain there. So if in relation to diaspora people, if diaspora people are identified to be deceased, fine, you take them off, which is fine if you identify them. And if you identify that they have been out for more than 5 years, then you take them off as well. But if you have another category, you will have another category, they're saying, those who they don't meet, don't get the opportunity to check for themselves, or there's some uncertainty, remain on the list. So we say that leaves us in pretty much the same position that we are. What we want is a list that has on it, if it has 50,000 people on it, that we can be pretty certain that those 50,000 people are 50,000 people who are supposed to be lawfully and legally on the list. Not that maybe 30 or 35,000 of them are supposed to be, and maybe the other 15 we kind of question.
So, Attorney General, based on what we're hearing from you, can we conclude that in terms of a percentage, government may be accepting about 15% of all recommendations, 25%, 40%?
The way the recommendations are, I don't think it would be wise or even appropriate to try doing percentages, because as I indicated to you, under each, they've basically done 3 heads that I've just indicated, but under them they have different recommendations, if you know what I mean. So they're like sub-recommendations. So unless I sort of went through the document again.
So which one can you see?
The identification, what they have said is that amendment of the legislation is required. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, that's not the exact words, but they're saying amendment is required and we should do the amendment. So that we are pretty much agreed on. Now,
so it means that the government will have to go back to Parliament?
Yes. Even under the recommendation of the joint mission, it would require government to go back.
But that is why I wanted to come back to the whole, when you started the situation, when you started your comment, when you spoke about the situation as it relates to the amendment, and you said you all have met countless issues. So that's why I want to come back to that, to state that, don't you think that in hindsight that you all should have brought down that joint mission should have been brought down much earlier, and that would have probably, by now, the situation would have been much more under control, seeing that we're almost on the eve of a general election.
I want to answer your question as fairly as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the question is fair, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because on one level,
Yes.
one level, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, it would be preferable. But if you take it in the whole context, it probably is not fair, because the government has been pretty clear, and I, speaking personally as Attorney General, and I've been intimately involved in the preparation, drafting, the discussions. Countless hours been spent looking at legislation from a whole set of different places. I challenge you now, and those of you who are here, if you wish, I can give you a copy of the amendment, the two draft amendment bills to take away, and you can take a week or 2 weeks, and then come back to me with what it is in those bills that is offensive. The point of the matter is the bills that are drawn up by the government. I am not aware. Nobody has actually presented me with any serious objection to those bills. And since we're talking about it, and in fairness, I'll go back. In 2017, the government sought to pass the bills in Parliament. You know what happened? There was the demonstration, whatever, outside and so on. The government withdrew the bill. At that point, the primary argument against the bills, as I understood it, was an allegation that the government was seeking to legitimize bribery. Okay? The two provisions that dealt with that, the issue of bribery, which the government's position was, the government was simply codifying, that is to say, putting into statute that everybody could read in black and white, what the case law says. So when you go all the cases, you go for the cases on the issue of bribery, that's what it said. Anyway, there was a dispute. The government withdrew those two provisions, Section 57A and 57B of the House of Assembly Amendment Act, as it was with the bill. So those two were withdrawn, and the government redrafted the other bills, took into account some of the other concerns that have been raised, and came back with the bills. And those bills were accepted as being workable, with those concerning provisions excised. Indeed, the leader of the opposition is on record, and I don't know how the Dominican journalistic population is allowing the leader of the opposition to get away without explaining himself when he has made an explicit statement going through the details step by step. So it's not a mistake, it's not a slip of the tongue to say, oh, well, he said bien immensi. He went through the process of the attempt to introduce the bills and the government's attempt. And if you want, I can play it for you again. I've done it before, I can play it again. And concluded that the bills are good and would work. What is it that has changed? Those same bills that he said was good. What is it that has changed that now emboldens him to take the view that he is authorized and entitled to go on a political platform and encourage other people to effectively break the law and engage themselves in what he describes as civil disobedience? And God knows what else will flow from that, for them personally and for the wider society. Why should he be allowed to walk around without explaining? Fine, we can change our minds. But should he not be required to explain what it is that has made him change his mind?
Are these the bills that will go back to the Parliament in the same form, or are there going to be more changes to these bills?
Well, as you would appreciate, courtesy, that's not a decision for me. I can give advice, but the decision is not mine. I really suspect that we have limited time. So I don't know that the government would necessarily just go back to the same bills that I referred in my statement a while ago to political maturity and the need for cooperation. My personal wish, and what I think would be in the interest of all parties and of the country, is that there is some dialogue, not the shouting across each other, but dialogue where people sit down genuinely, meaning to achieve an objective. Because there are those who believe that many of those who are calling for electoral reform do not really want the electoral reform, where they're happier to have it out there as an issue that they can rally and rabble-rouse around.
Yeah, AG, but the thing is, you mentioned about a cabinet decision to take this matter to Parliament before the election. Is that not what you're saying?
No.
So are you not saying that these bills will go back to Parliament?
No, I'm not saying that.
I thought that's what you said
No,
on the record.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think if you listen again...
Did you not say, AG, that there's a chance, or not chance...
Well, from the last question that you asked, I got a feeling.
That these matters will go back to Parliament before...
Oh, sorry, well, if that's what you want to... No, I've totally misunderstood your question. There's no... I mean, we are in a position where we have... we've had these bills. The government is very clear that... what I'm saying is that the government's view is that those bills provide the best route. Now, the fact that the government is of the view that... the government has always been of that view, and it hasn't gone to Parliament. The point is, to an extent, going to Parliament at this stage requires a certain degree of consensus. How do you... What's the suggestion? I mean, you have... I'm not sure why you even think that the government...
I'm mistaken. I don't know if Darrell Teed has been following, but I'm a little bit mistaken. Is there going to be reform before the next general election?
But that's not a question that I can answer. I have been involved in the process of...
Because I asked him that again.
Yeah, but I mean, how just logically, how would I be able to tell you, yes, there's going to be reform? To me, that's why probably, if you ask that question, I would not have interpreted it so, because with all the greatest of respect, I don't see how that is even a question that is, a credible question, because my purpose here was to indicate to you and your colleagues that the government had received a report from the Joint Mission, and to indicate to you that the government agreed with or was happy to see that the mission agreed with it in respect to the need for amendment for identification. It didn't go on, for example, to say that there was a need for amendment in relation to house-to-house re-verification. We believe it should. So there's a divergence. And then the other areas of divergence that I mentioned. That cannot lead automatically to the government simply turning around and say, we don't agree with the joint report, so we're going to go ahead to Parliament with the bills. That, to my mind, would not be a rational way of approaching the thing. So the parties, I'll say again, my view, for example, is those who oppose the bills, I think, ought to say, in clear terms, what is it about the bills that they oppose? I am saying here and now, and I've said it before, I went on Q95 and said it, I've said it everywhere I get the opportunity, that as far as I'm concerned, from my reading of the bills are perfectly fine, they're workable. They are the best opportunity we have for getting the reform we want. If people seriously have issues about the bills, and my understanding is the main area that I think I've heard a couple of comments on is to do with the issue of the confirmation process, particularly in relation to overseas, right? Then make suggestions. I mean, how can you make, if you have a concern, suggestions can be made as to how the concerns that people have. If people have concerns that somebody or some people may interfere with the process, the wrong people, well, there are suggestions that could be made, it seems to me, to address those things. This can't be beyond us in Dominica to find a solution to those issues. If that's the real stumbling block, we must be able to find a way to address that. Because the point is, we all seem to agree we need reform in those two primary areas for now. Other areas would have to be addressed after election, whichever party wins. But those two areas, it appears, everybody's agreed requires things. So why can't we come together and deal with it?
So having said that, then it comes back to the whole situation. Maybe the same question that I asked. I mean, where are we going to go right now, given the fact that, look, those people, they've said that government is not accepting that part of the report. Where are you all prepared to meet with the varying parties in conjunction with what is in the report and what government disagrees with?
I'll call it two things. One is, I think, as I said to you earlier, that question, I think, is that question, I don't know it's a question you should pose to me in that way, but you have posed it and I'll answer it the best I can. You wouldn't expect me to tell you, even if I knew where we're going. I will repeat what I've said 2 or 3 times. My view is that the parties, the main parties, should indicate a willingness. And so I, as part of the government, and as the Attorney General, the person responsible for the legal side of the government, can tell you that I would be prepared to sit down and discuss with any party who is willing to engage in serious discussion.
How soon are you?
This afternoon, now, whenever. However, I'm ready. I will sit down with whoever. But the question is, are other people ready? So when we sit down, we can discuss, we identify where our disagreements are, and then we can see how we can address the disagreements. The fact is, and what is coming from this report, is that no matter which version you take, whether you take their version or ours, you'd have to go to Parliament. So
You would have to go to Parliament.
yes, whatever that's what they're saying, you have to amend. So you have to go to Parliament, whether you take their version or whether you take the government's version. You have to amend. So we can go to Parliament at short notice because you can have an urgent or emergency sitting. The issue is not going to Parliament. The issue is getting there. Now, I am not in a position to speak for the Electoral Office, or the Commission, and they're in it. But all I know is that they have said all along that they have the equipment and the means and so on and could do it. Now, whether the longer we delay is the more difficult in terms of time that there is to be able to effect the changes that we want. And I don't have any idea when the pink shoes are coming out. So,
AG, the Joint Mission, they were here for that process to assist in the electoral process.
try to assist, yeah.
To try to assist. Were they successful? Were they not successful at the end of the day?
Well, I think they had some success. I mean, they managed to see a number of different groupings, individuals and groupings, on the issue and sit down and discuss on the issue of thing. I think in fairness to the mission, remember the mission was only here for 2 days. This whole electoral reform thing is complex. And so I think in fairness to the mission that they made the best effort they could, I think. I'm prepared to give them that they made an effort. You had different entities. But it may be that, for example, they may have further suggestions in light of the observations that we will be making to them, so the government is making, and others may make their own. So it may be that they would have further suggestions. But whether it's through the joint mission, whether it's through ourselves in Dominica, the clock is ticking.
Would you advise the government to go to Parliament to amend these bills as soon as possible? Would that be your advice to the government?
What would be your advice? Because that comes back to the same question that I asked you.
You're looking at me like, I mean...
Well, your question is at least better than Carla's, because Carla is asking it directly.
Well, yes.
Whereas you're asking indirectly.
Well, so I ask it directly, that's what I'm saying.
So, am I getting a response?
If you had an attorney, if you had a lawyer, would you expect him to go outside and say what advice he's giving you?
You see, that is the same question. I ask him directly, you ask him directly.
No. There's different asking questions to asking me what advice I will give. Very specific.
But again, we have to AG. I mean, like you quite rightly said, the clock is ticking. The way forward, you want peace. You want all heads to contend. Something government brought in this joint mission. They have made recommendations. Government is saying, look, we do not accept certain aspects of your recommendation, and I mean serious.
Not full stop. Though.
Not well.
For reasons A, B, and C. So other people can knock down the reasons.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're unworkable.
Well, but the reasons are there. So
they're costly.
So those who think otherwise will have the opportunity to say, we don't agree with the government because A, it is legal, B, whatever. So
So let's remove the verification exercise house to house that is not legislated. Let's remove that. Let us take the other parts of it that that is workable. How do you see you as the legal entity for government assisting in getting things working?
It's very easy. It's in clause 13 of the Registration of Electors Amendment Act. It provides for confirmation, provides that a process by which is effectively the same as the re-verification. Slight differences, but essentially it is providing for establishing who is on the names of people actually on the list already, who are entitled to remain there, and those on the list who are not entitled to remain there and should be removed. That is the critical area. So, I mean, I go back to what I said to you. I think people keep putting the thing to the government in with the greatest respect, a strange, it's a bizarre fashion. The government has sat down, its organs, its entities, its officials, along with others, and has drawn up 2 bills, setting out how a process which is achievable, which is workable. People are saying that the government's approach shouldn't be followed, presumably simply because the government has proposed it, without saying what the alternative is.
But the Joint Mission has agreed with them, AG.
No, they haven't.
They haven't?
No.
But the Joint Mission made certain recommendations that government has rejected. So basically, the recommendations of the Joint Mission, you would want to say, is in conjunction with what the other side is looking for.
Maybe not necessarily. The other side will have to say that, if that's the case. Let them say. The point is, people need to say. That's one of the challenges here. People are not saying. People are just saying, no election without reform. If you don't do what we tell you, we will organize civil disturbance and so on. We don't say what exactly you have a problem with. I just said to you guys, and if I retrieve my phone, I'll play it for you, because you've not heard it. You've not heard Mr. Linton?
Yeah, it has been played.
But you have not heard it?
Yeah, it has been played.
You're from what organization? And you've not heard it? And you've not heard it either?
We've heard many things, AG. We've heard many things.
You are tiptoeing now.
I'm not tiptoeing. We've heard many things.
It's not like you. It's not like
I'm not tiptoeing at all. We've heard many things. But
that specific thing, have you heard it?
I have heard many things, AG. I have heard many things.
Have you not asked Mr. You are one of the journalists who has a little bit of spunk, and you would ask questions. I would expect you to ask Mr. Linton.
I do not shirk when I have to ask questions.
No,
I don't care who it is. I ask you the questions. Like I ask you've diverted a lot in answering some of our questions.
No.
By the way, how soon will that report be on the government's website? Because people are asking.
No, it'll be on the website, I would expect. What are we today? Thursday? Probably by tomorrow. Certainly.
And is it possible that we can get a copy of it whilst we live there? It would be nice.
You will not, because as I understand it, the intention would be that what they call the stakeholders, the people who actually met with the commission, should get theirs first, and all of them haven't got. So out of a kind of courtesy, I think the government's position is to allow them to get their copy first. So, but definitely it will be available. Obviously, if it's available on the
website
tomorrow.
Yes.
Another matter of contention.
If not tomorrow, certainly by Monday.
Okay.
Another matter of contention in this whole electoral process reform has to do with the card.
Sure.
I've heard about the voter ID card. That is what I hear the opposition talking about. But what's the difference really? The opposition say they want a voter ID card. Is that the way the government is going?
The way the government is going is to create a card which will be used, it's created for the purpose of voting, authenticating who you are, identifying who you are for the purpose of voting. But it can be used for other purposes. So, for example, if you have your shop or whatever business you have and you want identification cards and you are prepared to accept that as a valid identification card, then fine.
So the government won't go for a voter per se, a voter ID card.
But what is a voter ID card?
A card for voting, a specific.
As I said on a previous occasion,
you won't go for something else.
As I said on a previous occasion, you can call the card a Christmas card if you want. The fact of the matter is, you have to present that card when you go to vote. So we can. This is a classic example of creating problems when none exist. It doesn't matter what you call it.
Okay.
I don't want to divert too much, because you can hold your thoughts a little, but
President's place and so on. How do you respond? How do you react to that announcement over civil disobedience?
But we have to put in context what is civil disobedience.
Yes,
we need to put that. I mean, as journalists, we cannot just go about and say, well, civil disobedience, and look at in context what the gentleman said, and they said peaceful. All that was also reiterated.
The peaceful was on a different matter. The peacefulness that was talking about going to the various...
Right, and everything was said, there's a time frame.
Civil disobedience will happen all around Dominica.
With the greatest respect to you, Carlisle, two things. One is, even if somebody says the word peaceful, I can say the word peaceful, that doesn't necessarily, sometimes I can say the word peaceful.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Everything else around it.
We concur on that one.
I heard the particular extract or address this morning when I was driving in, being played, and didn't sound like didn't sound very friendly to me. But anyway, now you make the point, which is a fair point, I think, that civil disobedience, those are not your words, but I think what you're saying, civil disobedience really can mean a lot of things.
That is correct.
Right? And
we have not to take it out of context.
And that is right. However, what I would say is this, is that this is something that individuals have to think about. Leaders have to be very careful, and if you follow in the saga in the UK, in their parliament, and the outcome or the fallout from the judgment of the Supreme Court, just yesterday in Parliament, and at the current time, the Prime Minister of the UK is being criticised quite heavily in certain sections on the basis of the language that he has used, or has been using, and how he needs to be careful about the language. Now, I say that to put this in context. If you call out people to engage in civil disobedience, leave aside whether you are justified for it now, but if you choose to do so as a leader, you may say to them, come and do peaceful civil disobedience. But I presume you would agree that if it gets to a position where it is no longer peaceful, and you, the person who initiated and called it out, is not in a position to control what flows, you are responsible for everything, starting from the peaceful, going to the riot. Would that be fair?
If there is a riot.
Of course, we are hypothetical.
Right. Yes. And I want to pause that. I love that discussion, AG. But I want to draw it back. And using the same analogy with the Prime Minister of the UK, our Prime Minister goes up in Bagatelle, wherever he went, and made the comment about in the housing. And he said that, we will give you a house and whatever. And when the people come there, tell them, such as mashkerit, epi avamamuyeyo, epi glosho. Isn't that into the same context that you have to be responsible for making certain statements?
My comment is all people in positions of authority and influence, Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, President, AG, and
leaders.
I cannot claim that I am not a sinner. On occasions, I may myself say something I shouldn't say. I hope if I do so, I will have the thing to apologize. But yeah. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I want to clarify something here. You are not reporting that government has rejected the report of the joint mission. That's not your comment, right?
No, that's not my comment.
Well, because it has been funneled out of here that government has rejected the report.
Well,
of the commission.
That's the nature. That's the nature of the beast. The fact is, my statement is on record, and those who want to read it will read. Most people in Dominica don't read. That is why most people have not read the amendments that the government is proposing. They just simply take the side of whichever side they feel they're on. We in Dominica, we make ourselves so foolish that all we can do is we look for a color, red, blue, green, purple, and that's it.
AG, Government has rejected the report. Government, I do not want to get into any. Government has rejected the report.
My brother,
it is fair comment.
My brother, that is your opinion. And
we cannot play with words. Government has not accepted the report. Plain and simple.
What you heard me say was government has not accepted certain recommendations. But you also heard me say the government accepted and was appreciative that the report endorsed its view in its amendments.
That is correct.
So how does government has rejected the report equate with that?
Put it together.
The fact is, we in the real world, it's like the report. I mean, you could put it off and we just talk for some
Okay.